Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we'll be looking at the Neo-Babylonian Empire in our continuing survey of ancient history as a framework for the Bible. Babylon, through most of its history, even though it's a very ancient city, was not one of the major cities in the area of Mesopotamia. But that's going to change now as we come to the mid-600s. This is, of course, before Christ. And Babylon finds itself in revolt against Nineveh. The king who brought this about, the king of Babylon, was a recent newcomer on the scene. He's a Chaldean. The Chaldeans normally lived a bit further southeast of Babylon. But Nabopolassar is the name of this king, and he enters into an alliance with the king of the Medes. He does this through marriage. He has his son, Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar, marry one of the daughters of Cyaxares, king of the Medes. And they're going to get together. Babylon and the Medes come together and they attack Nineveh. They take the city in 612 BC, and that marks the end of the Assyrian Empire. Now, after this, nature abhors a vacuum, and so the question is, who's going to rule the ancient world? And the Medes aren't really interested in doing that at this point. We'll see them back in just a bit. But we have Babylon as the new world empire, at least beginning out. And meanwhile in Egypt, there's a new dynasty in town, and Pharaoh Necho II decides he would be up in the running for this new world empire. So accordingly, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar. Nabopolassar is busy at home, and so his son Nebuchadnezzar leads the army, and Egypt marches up. These two armies, these two superpowers, are going to meet at Carchemish, and we'll see how that changes everything. But on the way there, notice that the armies of Egypt have to pass through the land of Canaan, and specifically at Megiddo. This is the ancient city that sits astride the narrow passes that are on the road from Egypt to Carchemish. And as the Pharaoh passes through Megiddo, he has an encounter with the king of Judah. Now, Pharaoh Necho, he's the pharaoh of the 26th dynasty. They call it the Saite dynasty because they had moved the capital to a new location. And he had inherited an alliance with Assyria, so nominally he's still an ally of Assyria, but not really, because there is no more Assyrian Empire. So he's really in this for his own purposes. And he marches to Carchemish, but he is intercepted there by King Josiah, the last good king of Judah, and they have an encounter at Megiddo. We're told in the book of Jeremiah that Necho calls for Josiah to let him pass unmolested, and he claims that he's been sent by Yahweh. Now, I don't know if he's making this up. Was this a real claim? I don't know. I wasn't there. But in the encounter, Josiah is killed. And that's still another event that's taken place on this at the city of Megiddo, a place where there had been great victories, but here a great defeat for the people of God. And that's going to become an image by the time we get to the New Testament. It will be like a little bit like when Texans say, "Remember the Alamo," or when French say, "Remember Waterloo." They will be saying, "Remember Megiddo," and they'll even speak there in the book of Revelation of the Mount of Megiddo. They call it Har Megiddo, or we say Armageddon, and that becomes a picture of a great battle. Well, we have Josiah. He was the last good king of Judah, and he has three sons: Jehoahaz, Eliakim, and Mattaniah, although we're going to see two of those sons, eventually they're going to have a name change. Now, Jehoahaz is now taken, and he becomes the new king of Judah. 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 30 and following. Then the people of the land of Jehoahaz, or the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, anointed him and made him king in the place of his father. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king. By the way, he was probably the oldest, and that's why they make him king. And he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. It's going to be a very short reign. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah, not the same Jeremiah as the prophet. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. And Pharaoh Necho imprisoned him at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. So he is put on the throne, and Pharaoh Necho, who's in the area, comes down. He only lasted 3 months, takes him off the throne, and he imposed upon the land a fine of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in place of Josiah his father. So Josiah had been the king who died at Megiddo. We have Jehoahaz removed from the throne, and now a different son is placed on the throne, but he took Jehoahaz away and brought him to Egypt, and he died there. So we have Jehoahaz, he's out, and now a second son of Josiah, Eliakim, but his name is now changed to Jehoiakim, and that's how we're going to refer to him. And throughout most of the Bible text, they usually refer to him as Jehoiakim instead of his original name, Eliakim. So Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land in order to give the money at the command of Pharaoh. After all, that's why the Pharaoh had put him in power, so that he could collect money to pay taxes. And he exacted the silver and the gold from the people of the land, each according to his valuation, to give to Pharaoh Necho. Now, meanwhile, remember, Pharaoh Necho was on his way up to Carchemish, and there he was going to meet Babylon at this epic battle of Carchemish. And here, the Egyptians meet the Babylonians, and the Egyptians lose, and they lose big. So they are it's Babylon who is the victor at this battle. It's a battle that decides who's going to be the world empire, and Babylon has won. Now in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant. So Nebuchadnezzar comes marching down, and he's actually chasing after the armies of Egypt, who are running all the way back to their lands in Egypt. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, and then he turned and rebelled against him. So for a while, Judah is under the sway of Babylon, and Jehoiakim was allowed to stay there. But then he rebels, and by the way, the book of Jeremiah tells us where Jeremiah was saying, don't rebel. God lifted up Nebuchadnezzar to do some things through him. Other prophets had said the same thing, like Habakkuk had said, God had said, I'm going to raise up Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 2, the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, bands of Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through his servants the prophets. And so what we have then in 605 BC is a initial deportation, where the sons of various nobles, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are taken by Nebuchadnezzar away to Babylon to be hostages on the good behavior of the king of Judah. The idea is that they will be raised in Babylon as good Babylonians, and who knows, maybe Nebuchadnezzar will bring them back later on to rule over Judah, but their loyalty now will be to Babylon. And so this is a deportation, but there's going to be 2 more, so I'm calling it the first deportation. That's 605 BC. 2 Kings 24:3, surely at the command of the Lord it came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done, and also for the innocent blood which he had shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not forgive. This was the judgment of God. But it's not the final judgment. So we read that Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, now these names sound alike, so make sure you see the difference. Jehoiakim is the father, and Jehoiachin is his son, who now becomes king in his place. And the king of Egypt did not come out of his land again, For the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Egypt's out of the picture. They try to get back into the picture. They're kicked back into place. And it's going to be all that Egypt can do to hold on to Egypt. And so we saw Jehoahaz, he's out. Jehoiakim, he's out. And now Jehoiachin, who is also called Jeconiah, it's a different name for the same person, and he's also called Coniah. So we actually have three different names for him: Jehoiachin, Jeconiah, and Coniah. And he now becomes king. Of course, he's a lot younger, and he's not going to be king for very long. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. Now there's a prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 22 and verse 30 that speaks of Jehoiachin. And Jeremiah says about him, there he's called Coniah, "Thus says the Lord, write this man down childless, a man who will not prosper in his days, for no man of his descendants will prosper sitting on the throne of David or ruling again in Judah." Now this is a striking prophecy, because this same Jehoiachin, or whether you call him Jehoiachin or Jeconiah or Coniah, it is going to be he who, he will have sons, but when they come back from the Babylonian captivity, even though his sons are looked at as leaders, they are looked at with great respect, they will not be kings, and they will not sit again on the throne of David, even though they have the legal right to do so. According to Jeremiah's prophecy, they will not come back to the throne. And we can trace that genealogy down through Josiah to Jehoiakim to Jehoiachin, and on through his descendants, through, we're going to see the name Zerubbabel and many others after that, all the way down to a Galilean construction worker by the name of Joseph, who adopts Jesus and raises him as though he is his son. So that Jesus is not a descendant of Coniah, not physically speaking, but he is adopted into that family so that he has the legal right to the throne, and at the same time, because he is not an actual descendant, he's not actually of the seed of Coniah, he has the prophetic right to the throne as well. Our passage continues, 2 Kings 24:10, "And at that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his captains and his officials. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out from there all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord, just as the Lord had said. And then he led away into exile all Jerusalem, and all the captains, and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land." So we have a second deportation. This isn't the last, but we have a second deportation. The first was in 605 BC. This now is in 597 BC, this second deportation. And we have 10,000 men of valor, the craftsmen, the smiths. Jehoiachin, he's taken. And also there's a prophet that's taken by the name of Ezekiel. And so we had Daniel taken in the first deportation. In this second deportation, we have Ezekiel and 10,000 others who are taken to, not to the city of Babylon, but this time they're just taken to Mesopotamia. The city of Babylon might be getting a little bit crowded by this time. And 2 Kings 24:17, "Then the king of Babylon made his uncle Mattaniah king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah." So Zedekiah is another son of Josiah. We've had 3 sons and 1 grandson of Josiah each reign, and now we get to that third son, Mattaniah, whose name is now changed to Zedekiah. He will be the last king of Judah. He's not the royal seed anymore, because that's already gone down to Jehoiachin. But he's now on the throne, and he will rule for a number of years. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. There's no change. They're still not worshiping the Lord. They're still not trusting in the Lord. For through the anger of the Lord this came about in Jerusalem and in Judah, until he cast them out from his presence. Sometimes we get the kings we deserve, sometimes we get the presidents we deserve. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon, even though Jeremiah told him not to do that. He did it anyway. Now in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem, camped against it, built a siege wall around it, so the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. So Jerusalem is now put under siege. This will be the last time, at least against Babylon. We have, during this period, as Nebuchadnezzar has come back to Judah, and mind you, he's come back for the third time. He's getting a little tired of this. And we have letters that are written. They're called the Lachish letters, written and found at a place called Lachish to the southwest of Jerusalem. It's a city fort in Jerusalem. It's about 20 miles to the southwest of Jerusalem, excavated by James Starkey in the 1930s. And there were about 7 levels. So it's an ancient city, great site. Even if it would be abandoned and destroyed, it'd be rebuilt again at a later date. And so on one of the levels, they found actual correspondence going back and forth, both from the city to the king of Jerusalem, to Zedekiah, and also just other sorts of writings as well. Great source of information on what people were doing at this point in history. The city walls, or what remains of the gate, now they were much higher in that day, but these have been uncovered, as well as places where the Assyrians were breaking through this city to capture it. It's an artist's conception of what some of those city gates would have looked like. Massive fortifications, and yet they did not serve to protect them against the Assyrians. One of the letters from the Lachish letters, letter 6, read, I pray you, and you will see the words of the ideas of that person, in other words, the prophet. And they're not good. To loosen the hands to, and when part of the words are missing because this is fragmentary, but they believe it says to make sink the hands of the country and city. In other words, there's a prophet that's saying something, and it's really disheartening. We read the same thing taking place in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is taken and thrown down into a cistern because those who are against him are saying, you're prophesying all these bad things, so that means bad things are going to happen. As if throwing him into a cistern will make the bad things go away. In Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 4, therefore the princes said to the king, please let this man, speaking of Jeremiah, be put to death, for thus he weakens the hands of the men of war who remain in the city, and the hands of all the people by speaking such words to them. For this man does not seek the welfare of this people, but their harm. They were thinking because Jeremiah was saying that bad things are going to happen, he was making them happen. And notice how the Lachish letters say exactly the same thing. Well, 2 Kings 25, 3 and 4, on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the 2 walls beside the king's garden. Though the Chaldeans were all around the city, they tried to break out and see if they could escape, and they went by way of the Arabah, the dried out place. And they make it down to Jericho, at least that's the attempt. They're going to try to escape. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. And then they captured the king and brought him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and he passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and then put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with bronze fetters, and brought him to Babylon. The last thing he gets to see are his own sons being slain, and then he's taken as a captive to Babylon. Now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, even every great house, he burned with fire. And so what we have is we have both Jerusalem destroyed and the temple is burnt. This temple that had been built by Solomon, it is now burned in the year 586 BC. Good test question. The Ark of the Covenant is also lost at this time. It had been seen previously, had been mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah prophesied it's going to be lost. You're not going to see it again. All sorts of speculation as to what happened. There's even ancient rumors as to, for example, in one of the books of the Maccabees, it talks about maybe it was hidden over in the land of Jordan. But it was lost. It was present in Josiah's day, mentioned in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verse 3. Jeremiah foretold its loss, Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 16, where he says it will be gone and not seen again, and it will not return. Then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the people, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. There's still a few. It's not like every single last person was taken. There's still a few that are there in the land, but not enough to really comprise even a nation any longer. So this is our third deportation. The first deportation was Babylon and some of the hostages. Second deportation was Ezekiel, 10,000 men of valor. And now in 586 BC, this third deportation, the temple is destroyed, the general population is deported, and Judah ceases to exist as a nation. Now, as for the people who were left in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left, he appointed Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, over them. So they have sort of a leader. Can't even really call him a governor because there's not enough to govern. But Gedaliah is left. And Gedaliah swore to them and their men and said to them, "Do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. Live in the land, serve the king of Babylon. It will be well with you." But even there it doesn't work. Verse 25, but it came about in the 7th month that Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the royal family, came with 10 men and struck Gedaliah down so that he died along with the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him in Mizpah. Even the poorest of the poor, there's a revolt even there. And then all the people, both small and great, and the captains of the forces arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans. So even the poorest of the poor, they leave in, can't call it a mass exodus because not very many people left, but those that are left, they run down to Egypt. And Jeremiah is saying, don't do that. That's like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Egypt is going to itself come under judgment and destruction, but they run down to Egypt just in time to see that take place.